Salufalava, this is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. I'm Susana Suisuiki. Coming up,
we're going to continue to work closely with PNG to support their priority development in areas like scholarships and agriculture.
New Zealand and PNG strengthen cooperation with a new agreement. Meanwhile, no confidence vote is seen as a safety valve for PNG, and
we were dropping our corporate jobs to create something that we know that hasn't been created before, but we knew it was about creating change.
We meet the Young New Zealander of the Year. Papua New Guinea's Prime Minister James Marape has emphasised his country's proximity to Southeast Asia as an important facet of his country's relationship with New Zealand. Mr Marape is being hosted in Wellington this week by his counterpart Christopher Luxon. Koroi Hawkins reports.
This is James Marape's first official visit to New Zealand following his re-election as Prime Minister in the last national elections in 2022. However, it's not the first time he's met Christopher Luxon, thanks to their impromptu meeting in June last year due to a defence plane breaking down, stranding Luxon and his delegation in Port Moresby en route to Tokyo. On Tuesday, the two Prime Ministers signed a statement of partnership marking 50 years of bilateral relations between their two countries. Marking the occasion, Mr Luxon announced $1 million New Zealand dollars to support PNG strengthening its public sector.
And as we look to the next 50 years and even further out, we're going to continue to work closely with PNG to support their priority development in areas like scholarships and agriculture. I'm also very pleased to announce that we'll invest $1 million New Zealand dollars to respond to Papua New Guinea's aspirations to strengthen public sector institutions.
Mr Luxon says that funding will be able to support initiatives like strengthening cooperation between disaster preparedness institutions and also in exchanging expertise in the governance of state-owned enterprises. Speaking before the signing, Mr Marape said that PNG brings to the relationship with New Zealand its proximity to Asia.
That buffer we have is a role we play in ensuring that the rest of Pacific are safe in our external relationship with not just Southeast Asia, but Asia and nations that is so big right in the face of our Pacific. Our dual presence at APEC continues to ring home the fact that we belong to a family of nations and we work back to back in many fronts.
On Wednesday, Mr Marape met New Zealand Foreign Affairs Minister Winston Peters and Leader of the Opposition, Chris Hipkins. On Thursday, he is scheduled to travel to Hamilton, where he will meet with the New Zealand PNG Business Council and with Papua New Guinea scholarship recipients at Waikato University. Mr Marape is accompanied by his spouse, Rachel Marape, and a ministerial delegation including Foreign Minister Justin Chichenko, Trade Minister Richard Maru, Minister for Livestock Seki Agisa, and Higher Education Minister Kinoka Feo.
Earlier this month, the Papua New Guinea government amended the constitution to make it more difficult to bring votes of no confidence in the government. Coupled with grace periods, times when such votes cannot be brought, it means a PNG government could face just a 12-month window for no confidence votes in a 5-year term. Critics say it undermines the country's democracy, that the votes are a pressure valve that release tension in the country. Don Wiseman spoke with political scientist Michael Kabuni, who is both with the Australian National University and the University of PNG, about the changes.
We were saying that it was all about bringing stability and so on, which I guess it's done. But you might also argue that it's made the government moribund, that it's too stable in a lot of ways.
Yes, and that has a lot of implications. Papua New Guinea, as you know, has about 800 languages, 1,000 tribes. And I spoke to some of the founding fathers, some have passed on, and even the expatriates who were here as young key-ups and officers when PNG gained independence. One of them said to me, he was walking out of this big oval when the Australian flag was being lowered and Papua New Guinea flag was being raised. And he said he didn't think Papua New Guinea would survive. Papua New Guinea had all the features that other African countries had that led to military coup and military taking over the government. So when you read the early writings, no one gave Papua New Guinea a chance. And it's surprising how it survived for 50 years. And one of the explanations for that is that whenever there is a frustration building up, vote of no confidence happens and the prime minister is removed. And it becomes this kind of a release valve for frustration. And I've observed this, in the last decade or so, when I became a student of political science. I was part of student protests from University of Papua New Guinea. And whenever we would protest and there is a frustration building up and then there's a vote of no confidence or the prime minister steps aside, whichever it is, there's a change in behavior. There is this sense of release. And it's not necessarily because the guy that replaced the incumbent is a good prime minister. It's just that they've gotten rid of this guy that they didn't like. And apart from accountability, vote of no confidence has provided this release valve in Papua New Guinea. And I think it's one of the main reasons why Papua New Guinea has actually remained a democracy. And now the government is doing everything it can to shut that valve. And I've heard Julius Chen speak, and he said vote of no confidence was put there as a release valve. So it's amazing how this, mechanism was built in, not only as an accountability mechanism to remove the prime minister, parliamentarians to remove the prime minister, but understanding the society, so many perspectives, so many tribes and languages and interests, that there had to be a mechanism where this frustration is taken out, but not through forceful means. So that's the other side of thing. And the other side is when you have political stability in a highly corrupt environment, there is a chance that the government will become more corrupt because they are not subject to change. They are not subject to accountability. No one is holding them accountable. And again, this has happened in the past. We had so many constitutional amendments that the parliament couldn't stop because the government had all the numbers. And these amendments were only reversed by the Supreme Court. So the government in Papua New Guinea, with stability, becomes more reckless and irresponsible. So in that sense, political stability in Papua New Guinea really doesn't help, whichever metrics you look at now.
Can we look at a couple of aspects that have come up in what you've been saying? Now, just to clarify, the Prime Minister uses these discretionary funds, but he's only giving those to some of the MPs, the ones who will back him, not to every MP. Is that right?
So that's been the argument from the opposition MPs, is that they are not getting their share of the constituency development funding. And so it's used like a carrot and stick. Reward those members of parliament that are supporting the prime minister, but withhold the funding of the members of parliament in the opposition and are critical of the government and not supporting the government. So that's how the prime ministers buy political support to amend constitutions to extend the grace period, for instance. This extension of grace period, a normal person, you would expect them to vote against it, but it went 84 voted for it, 4 against. A few of them were absent, or the seats are empty because the members of parliament have passed away. It's a really huge difference. Now, the prime minister argues that political stability is necessary for economic development, and he points to Michael Somare's period when he became the first prime minister to complete his term from 2002 to 2007. It coincided with economy growing higher than before, and he uses that as evidence for the argument that political stability is needed to grow the economy. Therefore, amending the constitution to extend grace periods. When you look at it carefully,
if you look at his time, and he's been prime minister for a fair while now.
Oh yeah.
If you look at his time, that hasn't been happening, has it?
Yeah, it hasn't happened, and that's because there are no resource projects that have taken off under his time, and commodity prices have not increased as much as it did under Michael Somare's time. So the economic growth under Michael Somare that he uses as an evidence to argue for amendments to increase the grace period happened because of LNG, so liquefied natural gas, so gas project that's led by ExxonMobil. So that came in around the time Michael Somare was prime minister.
So coincidental.
Yes. So Michael Somare's prime minister up until 2011. So straight after that, you had this economic boom, and that's because of the commodity prices picking up, as well as new projects coming on. So it wasn't really about political stability. And when you look at, there was a recent survey that came out, I think it was in January this year, a survey of businessmen, business leaders, CEO of businesses operating in Papua New Guinea or have got subsidiaries in Papua New Guinea. Their concern is really not political stability. Their concern is foreign currency. There's a shortage of foreign currency. Their concern is law and order. Their concern is every other thing, like utilities, consistent power supply, water supply. These are their top concerns. They don't even consider political stability as a main concern. So if you need the economy to grow, you will have to listen to what the business community is saying. And business community is not saying political stability is needed. It's favorable, but that's not a big concern they have. So Marape is alone using a flawed logic, making an argument that is really not backed by evidence.
All right. You would say to the government now then that this constitutional change they made a few weeks ago, they've got to reverse it because it's not good for the country.
Two things. First, I don't think they will voluntarily vote to reverse it. But if the opposition can take that matter to the Supreme Court and ask the Supreme Court to interpret whether that amendment was constitutional. And the opposition tried to stop that amendment from going through Parliament. And the Supreme Court, and I think rightly so, said we cannot interfere in the proceedings of the Parliament because of separation of powers. So that's fine. But now that it has been amended, the opposition can take the matter to the Supreme Court and ask the Supreme Court to interpret whether the amendment was constitutional or not. And I'm hoping that they say it was unconstitutional. And there are precedents for that. Under Peter O'Neill, the government he led amended the Constitution to extend the grace period from 18 months to 30 months. That was taken to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said there is already a grace period that is too long, and it insulates the government, and the government cannot avoid being accountable to the Parliament through constitutional amendments. And the vote of no confidence process is there, and it's very critical provision in the Constitution to hold the government accountable. So they ruled that unconstitutional. And I'm hoping that's the same result we get. But it comes down to members of Parliament, such as the opposition leader or members of the opposition, to actually take it to the courts.
Now, the opposition actually still has a vote of no confidence in the system, don't they? Because it was laid prior to this legislative change. Yeah. So is that something they've still got an eye on? Are they going to go ahead with that? Because they can still legitimately, even under the new law, can't they?
Yes, they can, or they can institute a new one, because this law doesn't apply retrospectively. It cannot prevent one that was already laid. And there is still, even if they want to change, withdraw that and put in a new one, they can. But the point is they've only got one shot. If they're successful, they can change the prime minister. If they are not, it triggers another 18 months.
One of Fiji's deputy prime ministers claims the 2013 constitution effectively legalises dictatorship. Manoa Kamikamida hit back after the former Attorney General and architect of the document criticised the government's priorities. Ayaz Sayed Qayyum told the Fijian media last week that social and economic problems were more urgent than constitutional change. The deputy prime minister says Qayyum is out of touch with the people.
We have inherited a lot of the issues that he talks about, but for Fiji to develop as a truly united country, we need a document that everybody can own and accept. At this stage, that is not the case.
Commentators are saying that the government's real motive is just political gain in the run-up to the general elections.
To be honest, if you are a genuine responsible government, you would have to look at constitutional amendments because it is a major cause of disunity, if you like, amongst people of Fiji. The classic example is 58% of Fiji voted against the government, either for the coalition government or other parties. Virtually all the manifestos of all the parties that took vote away from the former government talked about the removal of the constitution. And so we've been our mandate to discuss that particular issue. Certainly not political opportunism. I'd suggest that it's a national imperative.
Do you see it as being more critical in the run-up to the election than the economic and social problems in Fiji?
The economic and social problems, we are dealing with them now. But if you can juggle more than one priority, which has to be the case because of the 16 years of dictatorial rule that we've inherited, you need to do multiple things. You can't just hide your hand in the sand and deny the fact that the Constitution is an imperfect document and it was an imposition. We basically need a reset in terms of the supreme law of the land, and whether that means a reversion to 1997 or significant amendments to the current Constitution. We will be seeking interpretation from the Supreme Court, and hopefully will provide some guidance in terms of what needs to be done.
I've heard that you've been floating the idea of a return to the 97 Constitution.
Yeah, correctly. Only so far as it's an option.
Wouldn't that mean an end to things like dual nationality?
Where we end up in terms of the final version of the Constitution, as far as we're concerned, it's going to come from the people. We totally understand the concerns around nationality and all that, and those will be issues that need to be discussed in detail as well. Let's not try and preempt anything. And one thing I need to emphasize as well is, till now, the People's Coalition government has followed the letter of the law. I, as Syed Qayyum, the former Attorney General, cannot with a straight face say that to get to his 2013 Constitution, he followed any law.
Clearly, one of the criticisms of the 2013 Constitution was that it was foisted on the people with very little consultation. How can you consult the people widely if you're looking at scrapping the whole idea of a referendum?
Well, that's what we did in 1997. There wasn't a need for a referendum. That government agreed to have a commission go and canvass all the sentiments around Fiji. And then after that was done, and they tabled a fairly sizable report, that was then discussed at length with all the political parties. That was viewed as an adequate outcome. In Fiji, before the 2013 one, has ever had a referendum requirement.
Political expert Stephen Ratuva has come out and said that the government shouldn't rush any changes, and secondly, it should not be done without widespread consultation of the people.
Well, that's the absolute intent of what we're trying to do. There's two steps. At the moment, the way the Constitution is written, it is virtually impossible to actually change the Constitution. There's legal experts, constitutional experts, even in New Zealand, that have stated the same. So we need to create a pathway to enable a practical, pragmatic, reasonable changes to happen to the Constitution. So that's what we've been trying to achieve in these recent debates we're having in Parliament. So once we are clear with what we can do in terms of the amendment of the amendment provisions, we will then consult widely. We are absolutely nothing like the Fiji First regime. Our form and our style speaks for itself, because we are very committed to ensuring that there's a thorough consultation.
So in terms of some of the ideas that the coalition government has talked about, removing the label Fijian for all but Itoke, and also...
Yeah, and I'm not sure where you're getting that information from. No one's made any statements in that regard.
I think the Prime Minister has brought this up several times in the past.
I only recall, since we formed this new party, we've been very clear in terms of trying to ensure that we unify the country, and clearly, the idea of one name for all of us is a key issue. From my side, we will have those discussions and resolve it. It's a bit irresponsible to be trying to suggest things that we haven't made any public statements on.
I'm not suggesting it. I'm just going purely on what I've read in the media, and the Prime Minister's
raised
that
those
before.
Those are historical contexts when the Prime Minister wasn't a member of the People Alliance Party. He speaks for himself. But right now, there's been no official statement on anything to do with the core changes to the Constitution, because that's not really practical in our view. Just to give you some thoughts, for example, Fiji now, there's a lot of intermarriage. Our younger generation, the way they look at things is a lot different to 40, 50 years ago. So, all of these will have to be taken into account when we come up with the final version of the Constitution.
What about the idea that has been flouted, Fiji becoming a Christian rather than a secular nation?
Like I said, any of those discussions are really scaremongering. We really need to set the groundwork first to be able to change the Constitution, and then we can, deal with the specifics.
RNZ Pacific has reached out multiple times to Mr. Syed Qayyum. Samoan tech expert Namula Ulu Nu'ali'i Etiro Lafaele achieved a milestone last Thursday when she was named Young New Zealander of the Year. The prestigious award recognises outstanding individuals across 7 categories, with winners selected by a panel of judges. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Lafaele founded Digi Tautua, providing refurbished devices to families in need. In the past 3 years, she has gained recognition as a co-founder of Fibre Fale, which creates technology pathways for Pacific communities. She spoke with Coco Lance.
For those who might not know, could you just give us an overview of Fibre Fale and the work that you do?
So Fibre Fale is a purpose-led organisation where we amplify more of our Pasifika people in tech. How we do that is we actually create a community of Pasifika tech professionals and also of those that are aspiring to be. And we actually create that community by actually implementing skills, resources and experiences so that we can actually catapult them and equip them to be future transformative leaders and change makers in the world of tech. Now, how we do that is we have offerings. So we have in-person and also online delivery. So in person, we hold whānaus, leadership camps, especially for our existing pool of Pasifika and tech, because I think a lot of people don't forget that there actually is a percentage of us that are still in there and that we need to uplift them and move them forward, or also be self-determining to move into their own aspirations.
The award is a massive achievement. Do you know much about the nomination process?
So it's actually quite of a long process. I know from the experience that I've gone through, the nomination opens around winter, so that's kind of like around July or June-ish, where you just nominate yourself. And then once you get nominated, you kind of need to be endorsed by many of those in the community that's seen your work. After that, then it takes a lengthy process through the judging panel, executive judges, and then they break it down into semi-finalists. And then once the finalists are announced, we then meet in the gala dinner that just happened last week, Thursday, for where the winner will be announced in front of a room full of leaders, future leaders, legends of Aotearoa.
And how was the gala dinner?
Oh my gosh, that was next level fancy. They said come dress, and honestly, I read that brief as come as you are, but very bougie and fancy. So my beautiful dress was actually made by a boutique called Bangkeke, so Keith Toma. He actually created my beautiful piece, which is that silver and purple dress that I absolutely love.
Do you feel like there has been some pivotal kind of moments within your personal life or your professional life that segued or led up to this massive achievement?
I'll be honest, the award itself is not really for me. It's a testament of the resilience of our community, especially going through the digital divide and really navigating that space. But for me, the pinnacle points of my career would have been one, when I started Digital Tour, we were refurbishing devices around the second lockdown. But there needed to be a point where I needed to give back, and I felt like that was that stepping stone for me to step into that zone of giving. Because, you know, in our community, getting NCA, level 1, level 2, 3, then a good degree, you pretty much have a gold medal, eh? But it's very foreign to just leave and drop everything to go and start something new. And especially what we were doing, we were dropping our corporate jobs to create something that we know that hasn't been created before, but we knew it was about creating change. I always still felt like that wasn't enough for me, and it didn't fill my cup, because I knew every day from 9 to 5, I'll go into this corporate scene, help these people, but then I'd always feel like, man, but what about my people? And so it all started from me going after work, doing coding camps, teaching communities about technology, and that would always happen after work for me. And I think the pinnacle point was when we went through a redundancy. And I was in Melbourne, and I was crying because I was like, man, I worked so hard for this, but now I'm at a crossroad. So I was at the Yarra River talking to Julia, and from there, I was baptized by that river to make a choice to leave Zero and to go into this work of Fibre Fale.
That's Pacific Waves for today. For all episodes, head over to rnz.co.nz/Pacific. We're also on Spotify, Apple and iHeartRadio. From myself and the RNZ Pacific team, Tō whā soifua.